praise your holy name, God. God, we're so unworthy today of your love and your mercy and your grace. God, today we thank you for forgiveness. God, today we just lay it all at your feet. We come humbly in your presence. God, we just ask that you would fill this room with your Holy Spirit and open our hearts, that every word spoken and every word sung today would be to honor and glorify your holy name. God, let us always do your will in all that we do. We ask all these things in your holy name. Amen. And you may be seated.
Good morning, DCC. How are you guys on this rainy day? How are you guys on this rainy day? Awesome. Thank you. I thought it was dead for a minute. Hey, glad you guys are here. My name is Lee. I'm one of the pastors here. For those of you that are new or first time visiting, we are thrilled that you are here with us today, and you've picked an awesome day to be here today. We're starting a brand new series today called Be Rich. So let me ask you guys, how many of you would like to be rich? The first service was a lot more truthful in this group, is all I know to say. How many of you are rich? Hey, well, maybe you are more honest than the first group. Hey, that's one thing about being rich that's kind of really tough is there's no real hard line, principle saying when you make X amount of money, you're rich. There's no like, hey, if you have X amount in your bank account, you're rich. Or if your paycheck is X amount, you're rich. Rich is more of a feeling, a satisfaction level, and it's always being compared to someone else. And here's the thing, for almost all of us in here, we are rich. You're much richer than you realize. The problem is we just don't feel like we're rich most of the time. Because we live in a society and a culture that really idolizes stuff, glamorizes, the rich and the famous, and the more you have, the better person you are, and always saying you need the newest, biggest, fastest, shiniest thing coming around. The problem with looking at things that way is we're never satisfied, because as soon as you get the newest, biggest, fastest, shiniest, 10 months later, there's a newer one that's bigger, faster, shinier. If you're a computer, phones. Who still has an iPhone 2? When it come out, it was like, this is the best thing in the world. I'll never need another phone again. Now nobody would use one, touch one. We're never satisfied when we're always looking at the next, the newest. However, what we really don't focus on, pay attention to, is that we are rich. Just the fact that we live in the United States makes us some of the richest people in the world by global standards. Get this, if your household brings in more than $37,000 a year, you are in the top 4% wealthiest people in the world. In the world, top 4%. The global median income is $2,100 a year. $2,100 a year is what the median income across the world is. So if you make $20,000 a year, you're 10 times more rich than most of the world. If you have access to a vehicle, you are in the top 10% of people in the world. So when we look at things globally, we are really much richer than we realize. So that's a reason to celebrate. Shouldn't be excited. Don't you feel richer already? You should a little bit. Come on now. The problem is we just don't feel rich. Just don't feel like it. And almost no one will ever say, I'm rich. Because it's kind of weird. We live in a society that says, chase being rich, but we also are embarrassed to say when we're rich. We like to say, I'm not. And no matter who you are, no matter how much money you make, we're never there. There's been several polls, some research, and you can ask anybody on any level, and the answer is how much more do you need to be rich? The answer is the same. It's always double. Almost always double. If you ask somebody that makes $25,000 a year, how much do you need to be rich? And they'll say 50. If you ask somebody that makes $50,000 a year, how much would it take for you to be rich? They would say, if I made $100,000 a year, I'd be rich. Now, if somebody that makes $1 million a year, you ask them the question, oh, I'm not rich, but if I made $2 million a year, I would feel rich. No matter who it is across the spectrum, we're never there, and we always feel like we need twice what we have to actually arrive to being rich. Our goal for this series is not to teach you how to get rich. We're not preaching a prosperity gospel that says, hey, follow good and he'll give you everything you want. What we're doing, our hope is that you will learn how to be rich. Because in fact, most of us are already. We're just not very good at it. Before I dive in anymore, I want to give a little props for this series to North Point Community Church in Atlanta. We watch them for a lot of things. Some of our children curriculum comes from there. And this series, we've kind of borrowed the title from them because they've been doing this series for years. And what they've been doing is nothing short of amazing to see the change it's made in their church and their community. So we've kind of borrowed this from them, but we're doing the DCC version of Be Rich. Now, we believe here that when we apply the teachings from the Scripture, when we're obedient to God on what it means to be rich, that we can live our best lives now and in eternity. Because this is a characteristic of God. How we handle our stuff, we'll talk about today, is how we can have the same characteristics of God. So let me ask, how many of you feel like you have no control of the peace and joy or happiness you experience in life? How many of you feel like that my circumstances dictate my joy? A lot of us feel that way. We often feel like because of my situation, I can't be happy. We live as if our circumstances control us and determine our satisfaction. And what we hope to do throughout this series, also discover that our experience of satisfaction, contentment, peace, joy can happen no matter your circumstances. The determining factor is going to be, where do you look for your satisfaction? Or more importantly, where do you place your trust when it comes to your happiness? What do you look to? What do you place your trust in to determine if you're happy or not? That's going to be the determining factor on peace, joy, contentment, and happiness, is where you go to find it and where you place your trust in it. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at what the Apostle Paul teaches about how our trust and our money should work together, how these two should function together. And what we're going to be is looking in 1 Timothy chapter 6. So if you brought your Bible, go ahead and be turning to there. While you're looking that up, give you a little background to what's going on here when Paul wrote this letter. Paul was writing to his friend Timothy, who had just been appointed the pastor of church in Ephesus. He was a young guy being appointed pastor. And Paul is writing to give him information on how to teach the people of this church, because Ephesus was a wealthy city. They lived in, the whole world around them was, for the most part, poor people, but Ephesus was one of those city centers that had wealth. So if you think now how, people from other countries want to come to America, I'm going to New York to make the American dream. Back then it was, I'm going to Ephesus to achieve the Ephesus, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Ephesus dream. I don't know how that would come out. But that's what it was. People there were wealthy compared to global standards. And being a wealthy people, they spent most of their time prioritizing, chasing stuff to make them happy. The biggest, the next, shiniest, biggest, baddest, newest thing coming. And everybody wanted to go and be like them. And Paul is saying, Timothy, here's how you need to teach the church in this area, because most in your church, globally standards, are wealthy. And so this is what he's teaching. He says in verse 17, chapter 6, verse 17, he says this: teach those who are rich in this world. Let's stop there for just a second. We've kind of laid it out already. Global standards in this world, most of us are rich. And Paul is teaching those, if you're rich, teach those that are rich. They need to learn something. So there's messages for us, the church in the United States, the church here in Prestonsburg. There's a lesson to learn about this. Let's see what Paul says about it. He says, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. So let's look at what Paul is saying. Timothy, you need to tell these people. Here's what they need to learn. Do not be proud. What's that mean? Hey, because you have money, because you have more than someone else, don't think you're better than them. Don't be conceited. Don't be arrogant because you have wealth. That's the first thing he's saying. Don't let them make you think you're better. Don't let them think that you have God's favor because you have more than somebody else, because that's not true. Second thing he says, tell them, do not put their trust in their money. He says, don't put their trust in their money. Why? He says, because wealth is unstable. It's unreliable. Your wealth could be here today and gone tomorrow. You can have a lot, and it can be taken from you just like that. Who remembers about 10 years ago, the Great Recession? There was a whole lot of people with a whole lot of money that when they lost it all, committed suicide because they didn't know what to do, because their trust was in their wealth, and when it was gone, they felt lost. Didn't know how to live. We could lose it all overnight. It could be the economy tanks. We could go to war. Our health could decline and have to go somewhere else. We could be robbed by a business partner who took everything we got. Things happen that we could lose everything in just an instant. He's saying, don't rely on something that can be taken from you like that. Now, the other thing is, if you rely on your money, you're never satisfied. He's saying, you never have enough wealth. Remember, we always want double. We always want more. And if you're relying on your wealth, that means they're going to get on the hamster wheel of constantly getting more, constantly chasing more. And their priorities is going to be getting more, getting next. And the other thing about don't trust in their money, people who trust in their money tend to forget God. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So he's saying, don't be proud. Don't put your trust in your money. Do trust in God. This is what you need to do. He says, do trust in God. He said, listen, God will provide all you need. He doesn't say God will provide all you want, because how many times do our wants get us in trouble? How many times are our wants very bad for us? But he says he will provide your needs, not only just basic minimum, he says he will provide your needs richly. It means extravagantly you will have all you need. He will provide it for your enjoyment. So many times we get things that we want that steals our joy. It makes us happy brief time, and then it's on to the next. I got to get the next. I got to chase it. He's saying, listen, learning to trust in God is how you have joy, peace, and contentment. Because isn't that what most of us want in life? Is to, life is good. I like where I'm at. God has blessed me. Not chase the next, chase the next, chase the next. So ultimately he's saying, here's what you need to teach them, Timothy. Teach them to trust God, not in their riches. Trust God, not in their riches. We trust our money, our stuff. We miss out on the joy, peace, and contentment because of our wealth. Sometimes what we have can cause us not to enjoy what God wants us to experience, because it constantly stimulates that desire for more. It causes an appetite for wanting more. Now think about every 16-year-old boy you've ever known that had this mindset of, if I just get this car, my life will be perfect. And they get this car, and it's awesome. And then 18 months down the road, what? Man, if I had a car that was just a little bit faster, different color, or maybe it's a truck, if my truck was taller, it never lasts. It's always, what is it that's next? And when we rely on stuff for happiness, it's never constant. We're never satisfied. It's always, we got to go for more. We get that temporary hit of endorphins. We feel happy because of what we got, but eventually that goes away. Leave us wanting more. It's like eating carbs. How many of you ever sat down and ate a pint of ice cream stuffed? Oh, I can't eat another bite. And 2 hours later, you find yourself in the refrigerator. It's this appetite. I always need more. No matter how much I got, I need more. Trusting in wealth instead of God can cause us to do something also we never, ever thought we could do. Trusting in our wealth can cause us to forget God. You know, in Proverbs chapter 30, there's a man named Agar, and he has a prayer that says, God, don't let me become rich so I won't ever deny you and say, who is the Lord? Because we have this tendency, the more we have, the better off we have. Is look what I made. I built this on my own. Who's God? I don't need God. And we think, I would never do that. But we do. You know, since we're on the 2 weeks break from small groups, I encourage you guys to do this. Write down on your notes, Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9, and use that this week to talk to each other about this. That's this prayer of Agar to answer this question. But we tend to think, if I have enough, I forget God. We think, oh, I would never do that. Here at DCC, if you've been here a while, you know we have these impact lists or prayer lists people we're praying for. I will tell you, the people on my list personally, the hardest to contact, the hardest to encourage to come to church, the hardest to talk to are those that are no need for God in their life. Everything is good. They're happy. Things are going well. Why would I want to go to church? I'm good. And we tend to not have a need for God. So, Paul tells Timothy, listen, this is what I want you to teach. Don't rely on their money. Trust in God. But he didn't say, just teach them that, mic drop, walk out of the room. That's the only message. If I walked in today and said, all right, trust God, not your money. That's it. That's your instructions. And out of here, I would be shortchanging you guys. Paul does something better. He tells them how to do this. He tells them how to trust in God and not their money. He gives specific instructions on what we're to do with our stuff to make sure our trust stays with God and not in our money or not in ourselves. He says this. He says, tell them to do good with their riches. Tell them to do good with what they have. Look at verse 18. Here's what Paul says to tell them. Tell them, the wealthy in the church, to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. He's telling them what to do with it, because if you change your priorities, but you don't replace them with something else, you always go back to what you relied on. So if your priority is always getting more from me, and you say, I'm going to stop, but you don't replace it, you're going to go back to what you were doing. Here's how they do this. Here's how they change. One, do good with their money. He's saying do good with their money. Doing good means to be virtuous. Doing good always implies you're helping someone else out. Let's think of it this way. How many have you looked at somebody that spent everything on themselves and said, man, they're doing good. That's such a good person. But when you see them do something for someone else, you always say, that's a good person. Oh, they're the salt of the earth. They will give you the shirt off their back. We consider those good people, right? The person on Facebook, check out my new ride. Check out where I'm at on vacation. Nobody says, oh, they're such a good person. Really? Y'all had that same thought every time you see it, right? I would challenge you guys to try not to do stuff like that on social media. It will help you out in the long run, I promise. But it means to do good. It means to help someone else out. Be virtuous. The second thing he says is be rich in good works. Good work, good deeds, good actions. And he not only says to do good deeds or good works, he says be rich in them, which means to extravagantly do good deeds. Liberally give out things to help others. When we do this, we're doing someone else. And he said, like James, the brother of Jesus, said, faith without works is dead. Paul's saying, don't, not just works, be rich in works. That's how you make a difference. Being rich in good works requires a plan to be extravagant or to be liberal about helping others. You have to plan on it. You have to be intentional about it. Nobody just accidentally is very generous. You have to think about it, plan about it. Now, the third thing he says, be generous to those in need. Being generous is, again, like being rich, being liberal, give a lot, extravagant, more than they need. But he said, to those in need, because we are very good at being generous to those we love, to our family, to those we care about. We are very generous to them. How many of you have kids that are very generous to the point that you have spoiled them? I'm in that group. It's easy to be generous to your kids or to your family. He's saying be generous to those in need, to somebody different. He's saying don't be stingy. Don't give from your leftovers. Here's the thing about wealth. A lot of people say, well, when I have more money, I will be generous. That is not true. If you have a little and generous with a little, you will be generous when you have a lot. But if you're not generous with a little, you will not be generous with a lot. Research shows that the wealthier people get, the less they give percentage-wise. Why? Because it's a bigger number, but it's still percentage. Oh, if I have $100, yeah, it's nothing to give me 10% to give $10. But if I have $100,000, I got to give that much away? I don't know about that, God. I can trust you with my salvation, God, but I can't trust you with my finances. Or, you sure you can trust them with those finances? Don't mistake that the wealthier you are, the more generous you will be. Don't wait until you're wealthy before you decide to practice being generous. Don't just say, I'll pray for you. Make a difference. Be generous enough to make a difference in someone else's life. And then the fourth thing Paul says to do, be ready to share. When he's talking about sharing, this is an attitude. It's like being willing to do this, socially be doing this, be ready to communicate. It means kind of be aware of what's going on. Be ready to give your stuff away. Now, when we all have, if you've had little kids, you've always tried to teach your kids to share, right? Why? Why do we want our kids to share? Because it teaches them to have empathy for other people. It teaches them how to, help others, think about others, and put others first. And what we say, here's what we're teaching. I know this is yours, son, but they don't have that. So I want you to give what is yours and give some of it to them. We want our kids, and we are proud of our kids when we do that. When we take what is theirs and they share it with somebody in need. But as adults, taking what is ours and doing what we've tried to teach our kids to do is so hard. It's sharing. It means sacrificing some of what is yours for someone else. And we want our kids to do it. But do we model it for them? It just got real in here. Sacrificial giving is the way God gives. He gave his son sacrificially for us. And that's what he wants us to demonstrate for others, sacrificially. Let me tell you, this type of generosity is why Christianity survived the first century. First century Christians were persecuted. They were ran out of their homes. They were arrested. They had their property taken from them. They still survived. Why wasn't it squashed out when people tried to squash Christianity? I want to say part of the reason, the big reason, is because these people were the most generous people in the entire world. They gave without zero expectations. They gave knowing they weren't going to give anything in return. They gave when they had very little to give. No strings attached generosity. There was a man named Pacomus, that's the best Appalachian version I can give you of that name, who was born in Thebes, Egypt in 292 AD. When he was a teenager, Rome conquered Thebes. And what Rome usually did when they conquered a town was they took all the men that were of military age and put them into prison so they wouldn't run off and escape before they could put them into military duty. Pacomus was in that age that when they came, he was put into prison. Now, while this was going on in his lifetime, a severe famine hit. When there is a famine, prisoners are the last people on the pecking order to get food. They were starving in prison. But something really strange happened. In the middle of the night, food would start appearing in the windows of the prison. And all those in the prison survived this famine when some people didn't even survive outside of prison. And he said, when I get out of here, when I get out of Rome, I'm going to find out who these people are. They put him in military. He finished his duty to Rome, and he came back and found out the people that were feeding him while he was in prison were followers of the way, Christians. People who had very little was sharing with him so he wouldn't starve to death. He became a Christian. He ended up becoming very famous and starting a couple of monasteries in Egypt. The Catholic Church has even made him a saint. It is all because somebody was willing to give from the little they had with zero expectations in return. Did not need any glory for it. Did not need any recognition for what they gave. He don't even know the names of the people who did this. He just knew one thing. They were Christians. They were the most generous people in the world. The Emperor Julian wrote during this time, it's interesting that Rome could not galvanize their poor citizens because the Christians did more for the pagan poor than the pagan leaders did for them. This is how Christianity survived the first century, is because they were extremely generous with the little that they had. And it made people to want something. It's to see somebody give like that is inspiring. It makes you, hey, what is going on? How can they do that? I want to be like that. So what Paul is saying here is, listen, don't assume that all you have is for your consumption. Don't assume that all you have is for your consumption. No one is inspired when you take 100% of what you have and spend it on yourself. Nobody say, oh, he's a good man. Oh, she's such a good woman. She spends everything she has on herself. No one said ever. Paul's plainly teaching some of what you have is specifically for the benefit of others. When we prioritize using what God gave us to do good, that's how we keep our trust in God. It's how it keeps us from being proud. It keeps us from relying on ourselves. Do good with what you have. Keeping our trust in God allows us to have peace, joy, satisfaction, despite the circumstances going on in your life. When things are tough, you can still have some peace and joy because you know that your trust is in God. But if you're just looking for happiness, it's going to be temporary and go away. What he's saying, it's not about what you have, it's what you do with what you have to keep your trust in God. So, here's what Paul says happens if you do this. Doing good with what you have is how you can live your best life. Paul says, listen, if you do good with what you have, you can have your best life ever. If you want to experience all that life has for you, all that God has for you, trust in God, follow what the Scripture teaches about your wealth. Stop assuming it's all for you and your family and begin to make a difference. Here's what Paul says in verse 19. By doing good, this they will be storing up treasures as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience what? True life. They may experience true life. Not what you think you're chasing, not what you think will make you happy, but you will experience joy, peace, satisfaction that God intended for you to have. True life. And get this, the way he says it, you're storing up treasure for your future and right now when we do this. It's the only way we can invest in our future and experience the best life ever right now at the same time. If we are spending everything right now, we're having the best life ever at the expense of our future. He's saying, if you live the way God says, you get now and later. Because you can have both by doing it this way. True life is what life is really about. True life is when you are making a difference. And when you're making a difference with the little that you have or the lot you have, we experience this peace and joy no matter what our circumstances are in life. You know, we have this ideal in the Western culture that 100% of what we have is for our consumption. And we have this thing in Western culture, you need to do what makes you happy. You just need to do what makes you happy. And we chase it, and we chase it. We are the richest nation in the history of the world, while at the same time the most miserable nation in the world, the most lonely nation in the world, the most depressed nation in the world, while we have it all. Why is that? Because we're chasing happiness and not true life. We're putting trust in stuff. We're putting trust in me and not God. We keep chasing something we can never attain, because when you get it, you feel like you need double to get there again before you really get there. God's saying, get off the rabbit wheel. Get off the hamster wheel. Trust me. To experience your best life now and invest in your future, trust God. Trust His plan. Only when we do this, doing good, acting good, being generous, sharing our blessings with others, do we get to experience true life. Now, me and Pastor Matt and Pastor Alex talked about, not telling you what to do is not enough. We need to give you an opportunity to practice being rich. So what we're doing, we're extending the Be Rich Challenge for the next 2 weeks. No matter where you are in the economic spectrum, no matter where you're on in your life, some way you can participate in this. The next 2 weeks offering, we're giving 100% of it away. 100%. Today and next week, we're giving to charitable groups in our area, people we've already picked out, people that are encouraging students, people that are helping at-risk kids. We're helping people with food. We're helping with homeless. All kinds of different places in the community we're helping. Come back on November 3rd, and you'll get to see where it all goes to. But we're going to be doing that over what we get the next 2 weeks, 100% of it. Now, the other thing is, not only with your money, but also your time. We've got volunteer opportunities set up. We want you guys to share with your time, because that is some of our most valuable resources, is our time. So we've set up volunteer opportunities throughout our community. One is Fishes and Loaves, which is right down the block here to help give out food. One is God's Appalachian Partnership in McDowell. The Lunchroom Project, put on by our own Tim, is doing it soon at the High Rise. And East Kentucky Dream Center in Pikeville does food and clothing giveaway. Now here's what, if you want to volunteer, make sure you download the DCC app. And on the app, you'll see the logo for this series, Be Rich. Click on it, and it'll list those 4 areas you can volunteer. Click on it. You can sign up. Pastor Alex will be contacting you to help make sure you get to do that. So over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we want you guys to give of your time also to help make a difference. Now, the third thing we're doing in this Be Rich Challenge is our Operation Christmas Child shoe boxes you saw when you come in. We're doing a goal of 300 boxes this year. Each of those boxes will go to some child somewhere in the world that is not as fortunate as us. They will be getting prizes and toys and stuff in there that's excited, but also each box is a seed for the gospel of Jesus for some child. Now, there's instructions on those. There's several ways you can do it. I think the coolest thing is if you register your box online, you can print a barcode, and you can track where your box goes to and see where it ends up landing. So that's really cool. One of the ways to do it. There'll be more instructions on do it, but I think that's the coolest way to do it. So that's our challenge for you guys, an opportunity to participate in being rich. Next 2 weeks offering, volunteering with your time, and participating in Operation Christmas Child. So, some of you I know are skeptical and wondering, what's the angle going on here? What do you really want from me? The preacher's talking about money, there's always a catch. There's some people that always think that. We're not trying to get anything out of you. I promise we don't want anything from you, but we want everything for you. Your happiness and your joy and your peace and contentment only comes from we trust God. That's the only way we can achieve it. That's what we want for you guys. That's why we give an opportunity for you all to practice it. Because being generous is a characteristic of God. What do we mean by that? It means it's who God is. It's one of God's powers. When we say we're going to become a Christian and follow Christ, we are planning on becoming like God, doing like Him as much as possible, imitating Him as much as possible. When we are generous, it's one of the easiest ways we can have the same power that God has here on earth, by giving sacrificially to someone else. It changes other people's lives. It makes a difference. It inspires others. And it makes them think, who is this Jesus you're following? Why are you so different? Why are you so willing to share with me? It allows us to have God's character. Because one thing, God isn't concerned with our happiness. God is concerned with our character. And that's what He wants us to do. He didn't send Jesus to die on a cross so you could be happy. He sent Jesus to die on a cross so you can be saved and you can become like Him and you can make a difference. And you can become His mission here on the earth. Happiness is temporary and fleeting. Happiness is dependent on our circumstances. But when we take on God's character, when we become more like Him, our circumstances don't determine our peace and joy and satisfaction. We can get through any circumstances when we have our trust in God. And when we trust God with everything, not just hopefully our eternity, but everything, we experience something better. Much more than what happiness, which is short. We get that peace, joy, purpose. What is my meaning of life? Why I'm here? What is God, how's He going to use me to do something that makes a difference? Despite my circumstances. It's how we can live our best life ever. We're to be generous because God is generous. God is a giver, not a taker. You know, John teaches that God gave. John 3:16, God gave His only Son, whoever believes can have eternal life. He gave His Son for us. That's sacrifice. That's sharing. Romans 5:8, Paul teaches that God showed His love by sending Jesus to us while we were still sinners. Didn't say while we cleaned up and showed up our act. While we, in the midst of our sin, God said, you know what? I love you enough to give you my Son. Even though you're sinning, even though I know you're going to turn your back on me, even though I know you're going to reject me, I'm still giving you my Son. You know, for some of you, trusting God has nothing to do with your money at this point in your life. Right now, trusting God means trusting the gospel of Jesus and understanding what God gave for you. God, our Creator, who made us, made the world in heaven, cannot look on sin, cannot be with sin. And when mankind sinned from the beginning, we all became sinners. God said, I can't have nothing to do with them. But He created us. He's our dad. He created a way for us to be paid for. He said, from the beginning, all sin requires a blood sacrifice to be made right. our sin requires a blood sacrifice. And the only blood sacrifice that was worth saving us, it wasn't some goat or cow or donkey. It was from a perfect, sinless Jesus. He was the only one capable of paying the price of our sin. So he sent Jesus from heaven, expelled him from heaven to come to earth, to live like us on this earth, faced every temptation for sin we faced every misery we faced every unhappiness we faced, and he still didn't sin. Then he went to the cross and was murdered, paid the price for me, paid the price for you, so that we could be reunited with God, so God wouldn't keep turning his face away from us. Then on the third day, he rose again. God demonstrating his power to raise him again, that we can also raise again in our time when we pass away, that we can experience eternity with God, that he would no longer shun us away because our sin was paid for. Our sin was covered by Jesus. That's the first thing we have to trust. That's what we want. If we want to trust God, that's where we begin. Today is a great day to put your trust in Jesus. I want to ask everybody to bow their heads. If you've never placed your trust in Jesus, but you'd like to do so, I want to ask you to just raise your hand up high. Anybody wants to do it, raise your hand. I see that hand, those hands. Anybody else, raise those hands.